Hi, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Jake. Good to have you with us this morning. Just getting opened up here. Senator Pearson we've been waiting, but he came in the door.
Waited right by that door.
All right. Morning, Senator. And so it's Friday morning, April 15th, and we're going to be talking about some renewable energy. And we have Jake Clark with us to give us an overview on solar power energy, I believe. And Jake, we'll run around the committee here and introduce ourselves so you'll at least know who you're talking to. And so, Chris.
Hi, Jake. Chris Pearson from Chittenden.
Brian Collmore from Rutland.
Anthony Galena, Washington County.
Corey Parent, Franklin County.
And I'm Bobby Starr, and I'm from Essex, Orleans County. Well, good morning, Jake, and thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for having me.
So you want to give us an overview of what you do and how it works and how it's going?
Absolutely. I will try to keep this overview as brief as I can, given the limited time. The issue that I am here to speak about this morning is solar developments in wetland areas that are also agricultural fields. I'm a vice president of development for Encore Renewable Energy. Encore is a solar development company that was founded here in Vermont around 12 years ago. We started with one employee, and now we are almost up to 30 employees here, the majority of them here in Vermont. We've built out 60 to 70 solar projects across Vermont, and now we're moving into other states in New England. But from a high level picture, Vermont has very progressive renewable energy obligations or goals, which are built into its statutes. And Encore, as a company, would very much like to see those goals achieved. It is very difficult to find suitable sites here in Vermont. One of the largest constraints that we're working against is finding sites that have the lowest natural resources impacts. The natural resources impacts that we are sort of filtering for and avoiding include, we're trying to avoid tree clearing, we're trying to avoid habitat issues, we're trying to avoid rare, threatened, and endangered species. We're trying to avoid river corridors and floodplains. We're trying to avoid other types of site-specific features, aesthetics, and visibility. We're trying to avoid sites that have adverse impacts on neighbors and communities and prioritized view sheds. We're trying to find sites that are close enough to substations to make the interconnection to the distribution grid possible. Now, I'll take another step back and just say, we're working here in Vermont where the landscape has been developed by necessity such that the towns and a lot of agricultural lands have been built out across river valleys. The people who developed Vermont sought out low-lying, level, flat land that's not mountainous near water. That's where our towns and where a lot of these river valleys effectively are where a lot of our towns and our agricultural lands have been developed. So from a high level perspective, we're trying to find very, very unique sites to suit the needs for renewable energy. And those sites are often agricultural fields near enough to towns to connect to the electrical load near the town, and on sites that are not adversely aesthetically or visually impacting others, and sites that don't have natural resource impacts. So what are we talking about? We're talking about farm fields. And in a lot of farm fields across Vermont, there are parts of the farm fields that are classified as wetlands. I could get into the different classifications of wetlands, but the specific type of wetland that we're talking about here is a class 2 wetland. They're actively farmed. Now I'm going to take another step back and say there are 3 sort of benefits that can come out. No, I'm going to start over. The problem is that Vermont has, through the Agency of Natural Resources, we have wetland rules that regulate what type of development can be placed in a wetland, whether it can or it cannot be active in or near a wetland. Under the wetland rules, which are administered by the DEC, which is within the Agency of Natural Resources, under the wetland rules, solar projects are not an allowed use within wetlands. However, when there are class 2 wetlands within an agricultural field, that farming activity, use for growing food or crops, is an allowed use, and the Agency of Natural Resources does not regulate farming in existing class 2 wetlands that are in agricultural use. What we would like to see is for solar development to also be an allowed use in agricultural areas which are categorized as class 2 wetlands. We see this as a potential benefit for landowners and for farmers as an improvement to the wetland, an improvement to the function of the wetland, an improvement to environmental considerations such as clean water, cleaner watersheds, higher functioning wetlands, healthier soils. All of these things can be a benefit of a lower impact use within these agricultural fields that are also categorized as wetlands than the existing use, which is intense from an environmental perspective, intense agricultural use, either haying for hay or plowing for corn or applying fertilizer. All of these things are allowed in an agricultural wetland. The solar use would be much lower impact. So I sort of tried to talk about how it's difficult to find sites. Oftentimes we find a site that meets all of our requirements, all of our qualifications. It doesn't have a high visibility impact. The neighbors are supportive of the project. The town is supportive of the project. We have a good interconnection route with the distribution grid. And then we do a survey for wetlands, and we find in a hay field or a corn field or a soybean field that there are existing wetlands, and we have to walk away. And it's really devastating for the landowner or the farmer, because we can offer a rent or a lease rate which is much more attractive to the landowner than the agricultural use, because often farming in these agricultural fields, which are often wetlands, are the farmer or the landowner's least productive lands because of how wet they are. So there's an alignment of benefits which can come out of the solar being an allowed use in the agricultural wetland areas. It's better for the wetland from an environmental perspective. It's better for the farmer or the landowner from an income perspective. And we all know that a lot of farmers and landowners are having a difficult time economically. So I said it's better for the wetland. It's better for the landowner and or the farmer, and it is better for trying to achieve Vermont's clean energy goals. Now, I've used up a good chunk of time there, and I just want to ask, have I sort of introduced the problem effectively, and do you have questions at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Jake. Yeah, well done. So we should be able to understand where, what your issue is. I believe Chris has a question. Senator Pearson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, Jake. Many of us were involved in this wetlands discussion several years ago, and this issue came up then. So it's not a new issue. And I know you and Chad, who's the owner, I think, of Encore, are pretty savvy. So I'm assuming you've talked to DEC. And years ago, I remember sort of the reaction from them was, yeah, we're looking into it. And I actually asked our ledge council to follow up on that a month or two ago, and we didn't get much. So what is your impression of DEC's reaction? I'm assuming you've been in touch with them.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. Yes, we've been working for a couple of years with, there was a working group sort of established across multiple industries to sort of figure out if there were ways to change the wetland rules to benefit multiple stakeholders across different types of development. And that has sort of reached its natural end, and the solar piece of that didn't make any progress. But since then, we have been engaged with the DEC, and about a year ago, we had a conversation with DEC about what we thought might be a beneficial change to the wetland rules for solar. And the response was sort of lukewarm, and it didn't go anywhere. And we re-engaged this year, and the response was positive. We heard from certain leadership individuals within the DEC that the DEC would be supportive of a change to make to provide for solar as an allowed use within agricultural wetlands. And what we heard was that the DEC did not want to open up a sort of a rulemaking change within the DEC rulemaking process for wetlands. What we heard was what they would prefer was a statutory change to provide for these for solar projects to be an allowed use within agricultural wetlands. And taking another step back, and I'll try to keep this quick. The wetland rules were not built for solar. The wetland rules were built for pretty much all other types of development to protect Vermont's wetlands. And the solar industry appreciates that. And we think that wetlands really are critical and need to be protected. But we think that locating solar projects within wetlands, agricultural wetlands, will benefit the wetland over the existing agricultural use. We keep coming into conflict with the wetland rules, and it's a difficult process to work with the wetland staff within DEC because we're talking about sort of a square peg round hole kind of an issue where we can't get through the rules as they're written, and it would benefit both of us, the solar industry and the wetlands program, if we found a way to work together to locate the solar projects within the agricultural wetlands. The wetland program, they understand that the solar would be a good use for those areas, but they can't change the rules themselves. They have to work within the bounds of their program. Another critical component here is that the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Natural Resources have sort of conflicting or competing missions when it comes to these wetlands. So these two agencies have historically been in conflict around this issue. And I think that all of us agree in concept, but we need to figure out a path forward that we can all agree on that would benefit the wetlands, benefit renewable energy, and benefit the landowners and the farming community. So that was a long-winded answer, Senator Pearson. Thank you.
What are we talking about? Like a sonotube or one of those metal corkscrew poles? What do you actually put in the wetland?
Right. What goes in is we have racking that is steel posts that are most commonly, it looks like an I-beam. And, it might be 6 inches, an I-beam, 6 or 8 inches with an I-beam, right? The dimensions, 6 by 6 or 8 by 8, but it looks like an I-beam. And it's driven into the ground with a post driver that looks a little bit like the machine that comes in when you have a well driven. It's a tracked machine that comes in and it just posts these racks in. And then the racking for the modules is mounted on these posts. So over the long term, the impact to the wetland is there's going to be a fence around the project. There's going to be a bunch of posts in the ground supporting the solar modules. But the posts are very low impact over the life of the project, which is 25 to 30 years. And once construction is done, and we can do construction in a very, very low impact way. Once construction is done, we can come in and plant pollinator ground cover, which is good for the farming and agricultural community. The pollinators provide for all the pollinator insects. And we can cut maybe once, maybe twice a year, those pollinator species. The only reason to cut is to make sure that the ground cover doesn't grow high enough to shade the panels. Leave what is cut in place to decompose and benefit the soil health, and do that over the 25 or 30 years of the project. And we'll be building up the soils in the area and benefiting the wetland. And even in these agricultural wetland areas, we could put in native wetland species which have been absent in the presence of the agricultural use. So, Senator Pearson, I'm getting off track, but there's fence posts with fencing and there's steel posts for racking, and that's sort of the summary of the impact of the solar project on the ground.
Hey, Jake, what you're up against is a bunch of bureaucrats that go strictly by science to determine wetlands. The farm I grew up on would feed 140 animals. And today, I bet if the guy that owns that today went down there, he'd have trouble putting tile drainage in or digging a ditch to drain those fields that we always kept the ditches open and things. But you're up against that. Farmers, I've been working with a farmer for 4 or 5 years to put a manure pumping station through so they can use drag lines to spread the manure on their fields. And they get to a classified class 2 wetlands, and it would be easier to get out of, or get the gold out of Fort Knox and getting a permit to run that pipe through that wetlands. And then you run up against current use because most of the farms are in current use. And if you get out of current use, we screwed that up so that the penalty that you have to pay to get out of current use is enormous. And then if you make it through that, all that, then you run into some farms have sold their development rights. And in that clause where they sold their development rights, you can't put any commercial business in that, on that land. You can't even put a cell tower up in a pasture because it generates money and they call that commercial development. And I think there's probably a lot of farms out there that could use solar panels. I don't know what you pay for rent, but that could use that rent money to offset the loss that they're taking on the price of the milk they're getting, or just to subsidize their veggie operation or whatever. And I mean, when farmers can't even get a permit to run to operate in a much safer, cleaner, more productive way, it's going to be fun trying to get your solar panels. And what about pasture land? Is that something that you folks have looked at? You know,
Yes.
like what that is overgrown fields, but today farmers used to pasture a lot of land, and if you went through there with a rock rake and cleaned that brush out, is that anything that's good or not good for you guys, or to put panels in?
Right. Thank you, Senator Starr. The couple of different questions embedded there, and I'll try to hit all of them. First off, pasture use, even if it's or pasture land, even if it's quite rocky, we find a lot of pastoral fields, and we'd like to work with the landowners to increase their economic gain from those often sort of more challenged parts of their parcels. Yeah, pasture land would be oftentimes very suitable for solar development. And we can work with very rocky terrain. We don't have to necessarily remove rocks and ledge. We can work with it. So yes, pasture land is suitable, and we would like to be able to develop a lot of pasture land for solar use. You also mentioned the current use issue. That's something that's sort of a separate discussion from the solar and agricultural wetlands discussion, but the current use is something we would also like to work with. As it stands now, when a landowner that we work with has to remove land from current use and pay that penalty, we try to negotiate with the landowner to include an additional payment to the landowner to offset the higher tax liability that the landowner will pay upon removal from the current use program. We'd like to see that change because effectively agricultural fields are harvesting energy from the sun to grow crops, and the crops are either used to provide food for Vermont or to provide food for livestock. So the solar panels are also harvesting energy from the sun. And from my perspective, and from the solar industry perspective, it doesn't have to be categorized as a different use when the uses are really very similar, and the solar use is a lower impact. You also talked about the land trust issue, I think, Senator Starr, when you said that they've sold their development rights, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that's what you're talking about is farmers and landowners, yeah, including their land into land trust programs. And land trust programs is another difficult conversation that we'd like to have. And I think that we have to, the solar industry needs to launch that or initiate that conversation with the land trust programs, because as you said, the land trust programs don't allow any development, but I can't speak to that today or this morning. The land trust program will be more complicated from my perspective to resolve until the land trust program finds a way to allow for solar as well. And finally, one of the last things that you talked about was sort of the economic struggles that or economic difficulty that a lot of landowners and farmers are experiencing. And one of the things that we see as the solar industry here in Vermont, when we do succeed in finding a site, almost always an agricultural field, and working with a landowner or the farmer, what we hear from them once we start paying our lease rate, it's a much higher rate per acre than the farmer or the landowner was making from haying or from corn or from grazing. The landowners are telling us that they see this as a sort of a form of land banking to preserve the parcel in its entirety for the next generation. They're up against so many pressures. A lot of these landowners see the path forward for the land as subdivision or selling for another purpose. And when we bring in a solar project, they get to maintain that because of the lease rate, the rental rate that we're paying for those 5, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 acres. That income allows them to preserve the land in the family for the next generation. So we do see it as a form of land banking that's not so restrictive on the land as some of the land trust programs. So I'll pause there. And once again, thank you for the question.
Now, one question, I was wondering, do your rates vary? Say if you had a 5-acre parcel, is that a different rate than if you had a 10-acre parcel? Or how do you determine the payment to the landowner? And what is your average rate?
So the rate that we can pay depends upon so many factors, but effectively the rate depends on the value of the project. The value of the project is dependent upon how much energy the project can produce. And that depends on the size of the project, the sort of the solar exposure that the particular site will be exposed to. And we're also up against a lot of other factors. You know, we have to build in to the project all of the costs that the project will incur to ensure that it's productive in the long run. And once we can be certain that all of the costs together will result in a productive project, then we can run the math and figure out what the lease payment is. But the lease payment is not really necessarily dependent upon the acreage of the project. You know, for a lot of reasons, we need to build projects at scale to make them financially, economically viable. 5 acres might be a little bit more challenging these days than it was a handful of years ago. But, you know, the lease rate might be somewhere from $900 to $1,200 per acre per year.
A
And
year?
per acre per year. And could be substantially more than that in some cases.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
that guy, he's got 200 acres and he does, over $1 million.
The pumpkin guy?
I think that'd be
Better.
50 or 500. And Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Jake, I think you indicated that most of the contracts have a 25-year life to them. What
That's
happens after that 25th year?
That's another great question. Most of all of our projects have a 25-year lifespan, and that's because of other financial and commercial arrangements that are necessary to create these projects. But at the end of the project's useful lifespan, when it's retired, after 25 years, we are required, the solar industry and the solar developers are required by the Public Utility Commission to have a decommissioning plan and a decommissioning fund in place. We post a bond, we post a standby letter of credit for the full value of the full cost of decommissioning the project before the project even begins operating. And the Public Utility Commission effectively has control over that those bonded funds, and they're adjusted for inflation every 3 years. So at the end of the project, at the end of the 25 years, the project will either be decommissioned and fully removed, and the site will be returned to its state before the solar project was there, or the project could be recommissioned, and that would necessitate effectively renewing all of the permits that the project has with the state to continue operating. So it's either decommission in full or renew all of your permits and continue operating. And if you're going to renew and continue operating at that time, you would, what we anticipate, what we see happening is the racking and most of the equipment can stay. The modules, the actual panels themselves, will need to be removed and replaced with new panels.
And what do you do with the panels that have been there for 25 years?
The plan is for all of the components that make up the solar modules, the solar panels, to be recycled to the fullest extent possible.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Well, metal components and glass component, we anticipate that metal and glass can be recycled.
Okay.
Other questions, Anthony?
Yeah, I just wonder what size you expect these developments to be. I mean, there's only be too small, right? An acre of wetland. Would that not be worth your while? Or, what do you envision when you think about the direction that this might go in, and how it could directly help the farmer?
Yeah, right now, the majority of our projects are on a 12 to 15 acre scale. Some projects are increasing in size towards 15 to 18 or 18 to 20 acres. And oftentimes when we do find a site that is viable or feasible, and we've determined that the distribution grid is sufficient and that there's capacity on the local substation and that the town plan provides for solar in this area, and that we can work with the neighbors and we can work with the town, and we can work with the Agency of Natural Resources to minimize natural resource constraints. There's no habitat for bears, there's no habitat for deer. We're not talking about vernal pools or river corridors or floodplains or tree removal that might implicate bat habitat issues. We find all these things are green light. We don't have problems. Then we look at these big open fields and we find that maybe 25 or 30 or 40 or 50% of them are class 2 wetlands, and they've been farmed for decades. And the landowner says, oh no, is my project gone? And we say, yeah, your project is gone because we cannot place solar in those wetlands. So if it's a 15 acre project, and what 40% of it is a class 2 wetland, what we're talking about, 6 acres of wetlands in there that's actively being farmed. But if we took we cannot build around the wetlands. It's not an efficient use, and it's not an efficient way to build the project. And we don't have an interest of sort of spreading out 15 acres of panels around 7 acres of wetlands.
Jake, are those, of course, the way most fields in Vermont are, or once you get away from the river, is you might run across 2 acres that are not wetlands. Then you hit a spot that's classified as a wetland that maybe even takes up a 1/4 acre. Then you go back on to regular ground that's not it's a hit and miss. And that's where we're running into problems running the big manure pump pipe. Is you're going out across the field, and lo and behold, the satellite shows that there's a wetlands there. So, and you can't put too many curves or sharp angles in that pipe or you run into trouble. And then, so you have to go get a permit to cross that little stretch of wet. It's a real bummer. And I don't know what the fix is, but we have Diane Bosfeld with us from the Agency of Ag, and maybe Diane have you bumped into issues like this, Diane, that you could comment on? And
Sure. Diane Bofeld, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Thank you for inviting me in this morning, and sorry that I couldn't join you right at 9 o'clock. Had a previous engagement that I couldn't change. So thank you. The agricultural wetland, class 2 land that is in the production of food and crops is considered an agricultural wetland. And Mr. Clark hit the nail on the head, is when it's a change in use, is when the questions start arising of what is happening on this land now. So yes, that does occur. Those questions occur in Act 250 for primary ag soils. They occur in Section 248 around these questions of what is this land now, of what's happening when something changes. So yes, we do run across this in Act 250. The agency has requirements around primary ag soil. And if we come across land that is currently farmed, that is considered a class 2 wetland, the change of use of development potentially on that land, the land comes under the jurisdiction of Department of Environmental Conservation as a wetland, no longer agricultural soils, because there's going to be a change of use. They're going to put a building on it. So that's no longer considered agricultural land, but now it's considered a wetland. So their DEC takes over that regulation of that land. In Section 248, the energy siting regulation, you provided the agency with work in there for primary ag soils. We have the standard of no undue adverse impact to primary ag soils. And Mr. Clark gave you a very good description of what occurs on those lands. The agency is involved in making statements that you put the parcel back the way you found it. So if it is going to end energy production, that everything is removed and the land can go back to agricultural production. The panels, the poles, the underlying wires that may be buried in the ground, concrete roads, put it all back the way you found it so you could have agriculture there again. And so, yes, we have run across this. We do know that farmers are interested in placing solar on their land. And I think Mr. Clark gave an interesting name to it as banking the land. After 25 years, the land is still there, and it could go back into agricultural production. But the question of currently farmed wetlands producing a crop and or supporting livestock, that is a big question of what occurs when there is a change to the use of the land, and is installing solar currently is considered a change in use to the land, and it is no longer agricultural wetland. It becomes DEC's purview of a class 2 wetland.
Can you use that, can you use that land for pasturing? If there's solar panels on that land, do you know of any type of agricultural use that happens where you have solar panels?
Yeah, the Agency of Agriculture has done some work with the University of Vermont. Alex DePillis has done some very good work with UVM Extension on the grazing of sheep underneath solar panels. So the choice of livestock is important. Dairy cattle like to rub their backs on things and probably are not a good choice to put with solar panels. Goats also like to climb and jump on things, so they're not a great choice for solar panels, but sheep seem to be an okay choice. They're, they don't climb on things. They're not big enough to move the panels as a cow would be. So there's some work going on there. There's a very good video that was on Across the Fence, but also a fact sheet of helping those who own the sheep and those who own the solar arrays understand one another better. Of, the sheep are going to need water. Is water available underneath these solar panels? How's that going to work? Is the fence tight? Usually yes, but what's that access, and how often do you expect people in around those solar panels, and who leaves the gate open and all the sheep got out? So all those kind of questions are in this fact sheet. So yes, that is occurring. I think the question, as always, is 25 years is a very long time. Do you have a commitment from a farmer to graze those sheep there for 25 years? In the wetland concern, there is a time frame where dormancy of the land and not used in agricultural production. There's some concern areas there that it reverts to a wetland. So that question is still out there of, if it's not utilized for agricultural production, the potential of a reversion back to a wetland. Finding someone to graze sheep under those electric panels for 25 years and guarantee they're going to do that is always a question, always.
You do see the goat or the sheep right along Route 7. There's a big panel installation, maybe Ferrisburg, and it seems to be a really smooth coexistence. I love the idea of the panels being rain collectors and offering the sheep a little water. But anyway, it looks like maybe Jake had a question, and I'll hold my question because it's a bit tangential.
Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to comment on both Senator Pearson and Ms. Ballfield's comments about the grazing. And we do understand that it's complex, but we're actively working, very diligently to unlock the potential. And we are actively grazing sheep on a number of projects here in Vermont. One in Chittenden County, one down in Rutland County. We're planning on a few in Middlebury. There's a American Solar Grazing Association that has been founded by some farmers in Vermont and New York, if I'm correct. And we're working with them on establishing new forms of contracts so that we can effectively contract for the land to be used for grazing sheep under the panels for the full life of the project. And they find herds of sheep, and they find farmers with moving equipment, and the sheep forage underneath the panels until the forage is mostly used up, and then they are effectively trucked to a different project for a few weeks, and then they can be sort of rotated around through these solar projects within reach effectively of the home base of a sheep operation. So it's something that we're working on. It's something that we're excited about. And we think it benefits a lot of other interests. It benefits keeping the land in agricultural use. It benefits a farmer. It can be restorative to the land because of the sort of natural cycle of the sheep grazing and then sort of fertilizing right where they are. So yeah, we see a lot of benefit there, and we're working on that. One of the other things that we like to do for the solar projects here in Vermont and across New England is to implement a pollinator-friendly ground cover underneath the array. And we're working to find a ground cover that would be compatible with both sheep and pollinators. And there is a ground cover mix. The seed mix is called Buzz and Fuzz because it's compatible with both. So I'll pause there.
What about the rows in between the panels? Why couldn't a veggie farmer grow vegetables in that area? Or is there something about tilling the soil that might not work? Or,
That's something.
Between the rows of panels.
Right. That's something that's also being actively explored by the entire industry and by a lot of people. It's a multi-sector exploration, and we're all working, I think, to unlock that. I think agencies of agriculture all across the country would like to help to explore those opportunities and how to unlock that. It has to be the right crop. It has to be sort of partially shade tolerant, and you have to think about in arid areas, you have to think about how can you provide water for crops in a system that's also an electrical system. How do you provide, they have to be the right crop, and you have to have space for farm equipment to operate within the array. So there's a lot of complexities there, but it's something that we would like to very much like to explore, so that to the extent that the land can be used as an income basis, just purely from solar for a landowner or a farmer, we see that as a good thing. But if land could be used for both, that would also be a positive. I think it's more complex in Vermont than it is in a lot of other parts of the country where the growing season is longer. But it is something that we would like to see unlocked.
The other, Diane.
So a couple of other things that are occurring. There is research in Massachusetts around wider spacing of solar panels and the ability to tilt the panel itself in different directions to be able to bring a tractor, make hay in between the rows, but that is a different spacing and certainly can impact the profitability of an array just because there's fewer of them. And the University of Vermont Horticulture Farm is preparing for some research with a panel that is totally vertical, like a wall versus the ones that tip back and forth, but it'll be just a stand-up wall, and looking at what they can do with agriculture at that horticultural farm with a different type. Well, I don't know if it's a different type of array. I'm getting out there on the technology, but it's upright like a wall versus angled like the current panels that are out there. So that's they're prepping for that. I think they're in the midst of trying to get their CPG from the Public Utilities Commission, but that will hopefully provide some other insights on plantings, orchards, that type of thing with a different style of panel in Vermont. So there's a few other things happening out there as well.
And have you had any meetings, Diane, with farmer groups to see where they are on this whole issue, supportive, non-supportive, about wanting to rent or lease their land for this purpose?
It's been more individual farmers contacting us or landowners contacting us with concerns of, I can continue to grow corn here, because I'm using it to grow a crop, and it's considered agricultural land. But if I choose to put solar on that, then it's no longer agricultural land and I'm in a wetland situation. So farmers have called with those concerns. But the change of use question away from the production of crops or grazing of livestock to solar is the concern area. And I would encourage you, if you want more information on that, that you invite those from the Department of Environmental Conservation to speak to that as well. So that is the tipping point that is of issue in this part of the issue in this area at this time.
Jake?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Starr, and thanks, Diane, for those comments. What we're talking about the issue that we're talking about is that the way the wetland rules are written, land that has been in agricultural use and is kept in, it's something like normal rotation for 7 years at a time, or the preceding 7 years. If it's been in normal rotation to grow food or crops, it's considered to be an agricultural use and it is exempt from the wetland rules. If it is not, if this land that is agricultural land that is also a wetland, if it is not used for, it is not kept in agriculture or an agricultural rotation for 7 years, then it ceases to be considered agricultural use, and the land becomes subject to the jurisdiction of the wetland rules. And at that point, the wetland rules would not necessarily allow agricultural use. And for the landowner, if they don't keep it in agricultural use for 7 years, then suddenly they are subject to the wetland rules. And the wetland rules may not allow them to use the land for agricultural use. That is part of the big picture problem that we need to unlock. If we put in a solar project for 25 years and we grew pollinators under the panels, I might consider that to be an agricultural use, but Agency of Agriculture might not, Agency of Natural Resources might not. If we had sheep in there for 4 years and then the sheep business faded, then it's no longer in use for food or crops. And when the solar project then is decommissioned after 25 years, the land falls under the DEC wetland rules program, and the farmer does not have access to that land for agricultural use. This is at the core of the problem that we need to unlock.
Is it continued use, or if you went into a field of 10 acres, say, and you didn't pasture it for 5 years, then you put a bunch of sheep in there for the next 2 summers, and would that still be considered agricultural use, and then took the sheep out or left them even for 4 years, but then took the sheep out? Would you have another 7 years or 6 years to not use that land? Or would you get kicked out? You know, all that, I think all those questions need to be kind of laid out there for people that are, maybe they're skipping a generation on the farm. You know, the children don't want to farm, but a grandchild does, so they hang on to it. And so I'm wondering how that would work.
Right, and I don't want to speak over Diane, so I'll pause after a minute here, but the rules are written such that land that is kept in ordinary rotation to grow food or crops for 7 years. I think if you didn't keep the land in ordinary rotation for some subset of those 7 years, you would have a difficulty meeting that 7-year statute sort of rule for ordinary rotation. But what I would like to propose is that the legislature, encourage or require the AAFM, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the DEC within the ANR to convene a working group and try to find some ways to unlock this particular problem. This is at the core of the issue, and we'd like to see these two agencies convene a working group to study the science of how the solar in agricultural wetlands can be a benefit to the wetland, it can be a benefit to the farmer, and to try to figure out ways for the end of solar life problem to be resolved. It doesn't have to be that it's either A or B. It doesn't have to be a binary choice, such that, as it is now, if the solar use goes in at the end of the project, it's no the agricultural wetlands can no longer be used for agriculture, or that's how it is now. Or we could change the rules, and the rules could say at the end of 25 years, the solar agricultural wetland areas would revert to agriculture. The Agency of Natural Resources would be opposed to that because of the increased impact associated with agricultural activities in wetlands associated with clean water benefits. So it's like right now, we're looking at a picture where it's A or B. It's either it comes out of the ag and goes into ANR, or it reverts to ag at the end of its life. We need to find a way to figure out if there are different outcomes that we could come to that both agencies could agree to. Right now, one is on side A and one is on side B. And this is the reason that we cannot put solar into agricultural wetland areas. We'd like to see these two agencies work together for clean water, for clean energy, for landowners and farmers. So what I'm advocating for is for the legislature to sort of create a pathway for these two agencies to work together and report back to the legislature in 2023 on what they have discovered or what they have come up with.
Well, you'd better do a big public relations operation with the general public, because right here in this building, it's quite difficult to work with the Committee on Natural Resources because they like to control everything. We in our ag committee like to have multi-uses of things, and it seemed like the environmentalists seemed to want to lock everything up, and you know, the world doesn't work that way. And but here in Vermont, it seems to have that effect, and you have to change with the times. And if it's, you know, if we don't want to use fossil fuels to generate anything, well, then you've got to use the other resources that you have to generate that electricity or whatever. And you can't have it both ways. You know, you sacrifice one thing for another, and there's got to be some middle ground there, but we have a heck of a time finding it.
And we are finding it, Senator Starr. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, I could see where every farm could, you know, like if you had a 10-acre plot and you could get $1,000 a year in rent, at the end of the year, you'd have 10 grand, right? And that would pay the taxes maybe on the whole farm with current use.
Right.
And you know, we have to change with the times, and I could see farmers, you know, if they got a little money, a lot of farmers don't pasture anymore. And if they ran a rock rake through these pastures, they could make 10 acres pretty quick. land that would be suitable to put solar panels on.
Right. Yeah, think that you're talking about the right points here, Senator Starr. And I think that the environmental groups, the agricultural groups, and the clean energy groups can all get aligned on this issue. But we need a mechanism to sort of force the ANR and the agricultural, the Agency of Agriculture to come to the table and start working with all of these different interests, which are sort of naturally aligned right now, to find a way to change the rules to make it possible to put these solar projects in these agricultural wetlands that are spread all across Vermont, and unlock potential for a lot more of these farmers to get this income from these solar projects. On, you know, the state of Vermont, 90% by 2050. We're not building any more wind. It's very complex to build hydro. The solution that we need in Vermont is solar, and solar can do it, but solar is going to struggle to do it if we can't work with the agricultural community in these agricultural wetland areas, which are underutilized and are a lot of farmers' lowest income fields.
Yeah, well, I think you aren't gonna have any trouble working with us. But you move down the hallway to Natural Resources and tell them you want to build these on the wetlands, I'd get a good armored suit on, because you're gonna run into a wall. But that's only my impression, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but you know, I think if you had the environmental groups working with you folks and came together with a proposal to present down the hall, it would be much easier. I don't know what our committee thinks, but go ahead, Chris.
Well, I should think Natural Resources would agree solar array is better than a condo development. So, you know, and there is real land pressure, as we know. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. I've talked to Jake about them working on a coalition, as you're just suggesting. And I think DEC, I think Senate Natural Resources, probably House Natural Resources would respond well to folks coming together with some ideas, and I can definitely see the wisdom of us changing it in statute as opposed to rules, because that opens up a whole can of worms, as we saw a few years ago. So
yeah, we don't want them.
yeah.
So one last point, Senator Starr. The Agency of
go ahead.
Agriculture has met with folks from the solar industry, and we're quite willing to continue this conversation. We know it has benefits for farmers, the lease payments. We know that at the work that's been done to this point for sheep grazing under solar, and we're very interested to see the outcome of the research at the UVM horticultural farm. So we're quite willing to come to the table for this conversation. But today in your committee, you don't have anyone testifying from the Agency of Natural Resources. So I will put it on the record that we're willing to have these conversations and willing to do work on this, but currently we're missing one leg of the stool.
Well, sometimes you either have to have a one-legged stool or a three-legged stool. Two-legged stool don't work worth a damn. You know, you keep tipping over, but you remember the old one-legged stool with a little spring? Worked pretty good. Maybe we should just go it alone and do it.
I do have a different question for Diane.
Yeah, are we all done with Jake? Because yeah, we got a couple of questions more for Diane. Hey, Jake, you know, we only have basically a couple of weeks left. And we might be able to do something, with a letter urging the two agencies, or at least the other agency, to work with the other agency. We could probably do something like that, but as far as legislation, I don't know, we talk about it and see if, there's some way we can tack something onto a bill, but really what you need is we need a letter to both the Agency of Ag as well as ANR, urging them to pull a group together to try to come back to us next winter with a plan to resolve the questions, right?
Yeah, thanks, Senator Starr, and compliments to Diane. Diane just said that agency AAFM is fully prepared to come to the table and work on this, and that's what we need. So I can work with my colleagues in the solar industry and with Renewable Energy Vermont, and I can provide that letter, which I think you're requesting, and get it to this committee, and I'll do that with haste.
Yeah, well, certainly appreciate that, and I'll be thinking about things that we'll want ANR to, besides that, to give up to get the solar panels onto our ag land. Because we're the ones that are giving and they aren't giving anything, so we should get a little something in return, right? Above and beyond just getting rid of the wetlands. So I'll be thinking about what else we can get out of them.
Well, thank you for all these great questions. Thank you for the time, and I'll just pause here.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jake.
thank you, Jake. Like the airport. No. Diane, have you got another minute or two?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah. Hey, what I'm wondering is, we talked about the 26 organic guys back a month or two ago and how they were gonna, maybe need some retrofitting, both with stanchion barns, driveways, and possibly even a bigger maybe tank for every other day pickup. Well, we have, I didn't know if we had 2 or 6 or 20 barns, but what we got in the budget, a couple $100,000 to help address that. But I haven't got a clue if that's going to be too little, not enough, or if it's going to be way too much money. And so have you done any more work in regards to trying to calculate that out?
Yeah, the work is ongoing. We're working with Farm Viability and their service providers. They're out meeting with the farms and trying to get them spurred along to get started on this, because they need to. Yes, construction season is just really starting to ramp up, so they're working with farms to try to get them moving. Farms have got to get estimates and et cetera. So no, I don't have anything hard and fast of specifics, because not every farm is feeling any great urgency at the moment to get some of these things done. Yeah, I know. So what we also are working on right now, USDA announced that there'd be 20 million for the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, and we're putting our proposal in for that. There's some very specific things that those funds can't cover, and construction on a driveway is one. Any type of construction, so the carpenter coming in and doing the the carpentry work isn't really covered. So the bulk tank could be a grant from the Northeast Area Business Innovation Center, but the taking out the walls or raising the ceiling or whatever else has got to go with that bulk tank is something that can't be covered. So I think anything will be helpful. In a way, it's like a match of you're going to get a new bulk tank that's covered under the USDA funding, and the carpentry is going to cost you another 10 to 15,000, and that can't be covered. So if there were funding available, I think anything is helpful. Any amount would be helpful to be able to have that ability to help farmers cover the items that aren't possible through the other granting programs. So if you can maintain that funds, that's great. But I will add that I support the governor's budget as proposed, just to make sure you know that. And so, yes, those funds would be helpful.
I think that included that 200,000. I mean, I just soon let him take the credit for it when he gets on TV. I just want to get the job done.
Understood. No, I think it would be very helpful, especially for those costs that couldn't be covered by the USDA funding.
Yeah, well, that's great that the bulk tanks, because that's where you could get some serious money involved, and it would eat up a couple 100,000 pretty quick. But driveways and milk house building construction.
So if you're changing stanchions, you probably need new watering systems and another means to manage the cattle. So those type pieces of equipment could, but the tearing out of the old stanchions wouldn't be, because that would be considered a construction. So yes, all these types of examples, there's pieces that the USDA funds won't cover, but if we had some other funds that could be very flexible funds, meaning not ARPA, just to be clear, if we could, that would be great.
Yeah.
But in essence, that sort of works out to be a de facto cost share,
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
yeah. No, I think that was good. The other thing that's gonna be in there that you may not know yet, is we've had some meeting with our smaller diversified farm people and new farmers, and they find it difficult to know who to call for specific questions. And we had a meeting with Abby and Ellen yesterday, and I don't know if anybody else was on, but they felt that they could put something together. Well, I don't know if they felt that way, but we felt like they could put something together that would make it easier for these beginning farmers to get the professional help that we have sort of scattered from Extension Service to you folks to VHCB, and have it in one location, or have that list in multi-locations. So if they called Extension, they would get the same answer basically if they called you or called VHCB. So that's going to be in there, and I don't know, it may be in the administrative part and not hooked to the $200,000, but the idea that we haven't had in appropriations are, yeah, I guess we had it down there and here too. If there's money left in one of these kitties and you needed some to do a pamphlet or do a flyer or whatever, I think you already have that authority to use any surplus money, maybe. If you don't,
Yes,
we'll try to get you some.
Well, yes, once the budget is finalized, the secretary has the authority to move up to $25,000, or excuse me, up to $50,000 around within the budget. So if it is unspent in one area,
If that's the case, have him send the Senate Ag Committee $24,999, and we'll try to push some good legislation your way.
huh? That sounds interesting.
Research.
Yeah, for research. No, so that would be good, Diane, and if you kind of look after that, I would expect that it'll make it through. So is there anything else, Chris?
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing that. And this may be too late to be realistic, but Diane, on the agency ran a grant program through having a federal grant, and I think it's known as the Pack and Store grants, or it was to help veggie farmers around cleaning station, wash and store, wash and pack. What's it called? I never quite can remember.
Yep. Now I understand what you're saying. Yes, but pack houses or wash houses. Yes, I understand what you're saying. Okay.
And these were what I heard from, and in fact, we heard just the other day from some of those guys. These are really little, like $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 grants that makes a huge difference. And those are too small to go through working lands, et cetera. So as I understand it, the agency still has the website, the whole thing sort of sits there, but there's no money left. And then the whole operation was a federal grant. If somewhere along the lines we found you a little bit of money, would it be fairly straightforward to turn that back on?
Yeah, the documentation, the application process. I mean, we wouldn't have to reform those. I mean, we could utilize past materials for it. Yes, that was those were considered capital improvements at the time, and we had 2 year in the 2-year cycle of the capital bill, we had 2 years of funding. That was one source of funds, and yes, some of the granting funds from the Food Safety Modernization Act were a part of that. But yes, those no money at this point to manage either in the capital bill or from the Food Safety Modernization Act. So yes, the infrastructure exists. Funding doesn't. So the potential to restart that granting program with funds would probably be minimal effort. But once again, just being clear that ARPA funds have a lot more strings attached to them than any other source of funds. So when you're finding money, ARPA money is not easy to use.
No, I've heard you loud and clear, and I also know you support the governor's budget, which does not include this.
Not very well, though.
And thank you for that. Just give me a sense of scale in those 2 years. I mean, we're not talking a lot of money here, right? What did we have 100 grand in there? What was the?
I would, let me go back and check the numbers. I have them somewhere in my documents, but I think you're right that it may have been 100,000 each year, but I will get that to you specifically. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I will get you those numbers.
Yeah, if you could email us that today, if there was any chance, I'd be grateful. And again, we hear you, not ARPA, but it's always nice when there's the sort of skeleton there. If we can juice it with a little bit of money, that'd be great. And who knows, I'm probably too late, but I appreciate your thinking on that.
What about some of the 20 million? Could that be used? Or if we had, if you had extra money left over from either the money for the milk houses and roads, or money left over from this the budget adjustment on the insurance premium money, was that definitely earmarked just for that, or could you move some of that?
Yeah, you had a lot of questions in there. The 20 million from USDA is for the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, dairy. So nope, not produce.
Yeah.
The program from the Budget Adjustment Act, the 2.6 million for the dairy margin coverage program, you had that stated clearly in the statute that any remaining funds would be carried into the next year for the same program. So you didn't allow diversion of that one. The Working Lands funding from the Budget Adjustment Act, you know, how that will be spent could be a possibility for this type of program, or current funding. So
You have way more requests for working lands than what we give you for money, so there isn't gonna be any balance there.
correct. So yeah, the two that you spoke of, Dairy Business Innovation Center and the Dairy Margin Coverage Insurance Reimbursement Program are specific to dairy and could not, the way it's written, could not be utilized in any other manner. But if this upcoming proposal for the 200,000, if you included other language in there, that it's not just dairy operations, you know, bulk tanks and stanchions and those kind of things are fairly specific to dairy and not produce. So you would have to write that more broadly if you were to think of us using remaining funds or a portion of those funds for something other than dairy. So that would be important in the language.
Did you guys, the capital, whatever was the transformational dollars in Sorokin's economic development bill? We took that, it was some 40 million and it came way down, I think. But, you know, I don't know, we're gonna debate it on the floor, but you know, this is just like it's a tiny sliver of all.
Yeah,
that
what
stuff.
would you need in there for
Hundreds.
for the wash stations, or, because I think when we did that, it helped construct or fix the building to some degree, as well as buying wash stations and so.
Right, the other
Yeah.
one was ARPA.
Yeah, when you look that up, you know, let us know what you find out, Diane. That'd be most helpful.
Yes, I will do that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Diane?
No.
Senator,
We got the letter from Organic Valley, basically asking us to put $1 million into the budget to help to
Oh, yeah.
get their new people online in terms of the access to driveways and whatnot. Organic Valley sent us a letter for urging us to recommending it to us that we put $1 million aside for that.
You call them and tell them that you were the only one that received that, but it was
Yeah.
taken, you took care of it,
All right.
and there is money there.
Not a million,
After lunch.
Not $1 million, but there's adequate funds.
I have a totally unrelated question for Diane. Back to wetlands. Just, it's okay, just whenever we talk about the drag lines and wetlands, I have this image in my mind that I've just got to ask you. So some wetlands are huge, some are very skinny, kind of edge of field. And whenever we try to go through them or whatever, people get irritated and, you know, permits are involved and all that. In the cases where they're not very wide, and I know that a wetland sort of stops and then there's a buffer, but can we not like suspend the pipe above so that you're not, like, so that it's
Some wetlands aren't the ones you're thinking of, they just might be a wet spot on.
No, I mean, I understand
They
that,
ain't
but
no wetlands, Chris. You could walk through there with your dress shoes on. I mean, they're just classified that way.
I understand that, but my point is,
Because there's
if we're
pressure
not
in the soil.
disturbing, if we're not going into it, can you suspend the hose over the wetland?
Oh, the
And-
hose
Yeah,
pipe.
well, the pipe itself, it doesn't
It's that
need,
big around.
well, so my question stands. if you go over the land and it's not submerged, maybe there's pump issues. I mean, I understand it's not
So
that
you wanna
simple.
build pipelines in the land?
Yeah, that's what we are talking
No,
about.
but we're in pretty good shape with that at the present time. If you go through the wetland and dig your trench
Yeah,
and put your pipe in,
yeah,
and then you
Okay.
cover it back up and don't disturb only that
yeah.
area, they'll allow
They'll
it. So
allow-
we're in
okay.
pretty good shape there. But these solar arrays.
No,
mean,
no,
it
I
should be
understand that.
the same
I just
thing.
have this very specific question of, I guess maybe you can phrase it. Are we disturbing a wetland if you're just traversing it over the top? And does anybody ever try that strategy?
I haven't heard of anybody trying that strategy. You're beyond my knowledge of engineering of pumps and pressures and all those kind of things. But I think the question is, you know, how big, how do you need a support under the pipe, and then you're putting that into the soils? And so
Yeah, I understand.
it's a tough one to provide any firm answer on, because I guess it's one of those it depends kind of things, as we love
Yeah.
to give those kind of answers in state government. But it probably does depend on the specific situation. But it sounds like Senator Starr has found a solution for the burying of a pipe. And I think keeping it all at one level, so to speak, and not
Yeah,
going
yeah.
up and then back down is probably engineering wise and pressures and all those things maybe better than having ups and downs.
Understood. Thank you.
But I found others that are one other outfit that's a lot harder to deal with than A&M. Anybody want to guess what that is?
Can't wait.
No takers.
No.
The
But-
railroads.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right.
They stole basically this land from a farm up north. The farmer back in 1920 or 30 never got a dime for them crossing the land. Well, then in 37, when they were putting the tracks finally through, they went to DC and they got an amendment to some law down there. They call it the commissioner's paper that gave them the land. So they didn't take it by eminent domain. They wrote it in this law in Washington DC that the land would automatically be theirs if the tracks went through. And now they won't let the farmer drill. You know, they have this big drill that goes on the end of a pipe, big pipe.
Right.
And they
Hold it.
drill and go right through and underneath, maybe 10, 12 feet down. And so that's the case. Same, the drill and the pipe are the same. Then they put this 8-inch or 10-inch pipe inside the big pipe to put the manure through. And that 8 or 10-inch pipe has these collars that go around it to make the pipe fit tight inside the big pipe.
Yeah.
And then they close in the end with a solid piece on each end of the pipe. And they won't even answer the phone.
No,
But anyway,
the town of St. Albans actually owns land, it's municipal land, that now 50 acres of it are wetland, because the railroad let a culvert go bad. And so it clogged it, and it we have a public works project now, but it got flooded 30 years ago, and it's now like all been delineated as wetlands because the flow.
Reclaiming wetlands, that's,
Yeah.
should get some credit.
Diane, did you have anything else for us?
Yeah, yes, sir. So we are, the Budget Adjustment Act and the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, we're in conversations with USDA Farm Service Agency to see if we can, how much information we can share back and forth federal agency, state agency, all sorts of paperwork to get through. But they have told us there's 432 enrolled, and the cost of, or the amount of premium in total is 1.5 million. So yes, there will be money left over. You provided 2.6 million. So we're trying to get ready for that. But only 13% of the farms have paid in full. So 13 out of 432, the rest have until September to pay. And you've made this a reimbursement program. So, a very large number of farmers won't get any money until they've paid in full, and they have until September to do that. So just giving you that parameters that we can pay those who are paid in full because it's a reimbursement. The rest of them have a long time before they'll get a check.
My guess is most of that 13% of the larger farms too.
Maybe, I don't know. Like we can't share names yet. We're working on that, how to be able to share information. I know.
But there is not, you have sent notices to the 432.
We have
that
not.
We will reimburse them.
No, we have not yet. That's one of the things we're working on. We would like USDA to send that out because they know exactly who purchased the insurance. We don't.
What about?
So we're working on it.
430, that's about, 430 is about our whole universe of dairy, right? It's
Yes,
some of the-
but we know that there's 568 out there. And so that other 130 will be contacting us and asking what we're talking about and why can't they get any money? But they didn't sign up for the program. So we'd rather be very targeted than buckshot. So
Well,
we're working on it.
the boss is good at writing headlines, Diane.
I
I
understand.
should think you could, you should would be able to handle that messaging.
We're
What
trying
about
to,
letting USDA or who the heck ever you're dealing with at USDA, let them send the letters to those 432.
That's what we're working on. We're working on that. I
okay.
just wanted to give you an update of how many and the fact that, and those who did not pay are hoping that they can have the premium amount paid if there are program payments throughout the calendar year. So they're all banking on there'll be some payments and that premium amount will go down. Yes, we'll reimburse for the full, but that's why some of them wait until September. Because maybe they don't owe anything by the time September comes, maybe they do. So there's a lot of things going on. There really isn't an incentive for a farmer to say, oh, the state's going to reimburse me, I'll go pay now. Because if they had to pay $500, we're going to give them $500 back. So it's kind of like,
What do we care?
why rush?
Why would we care if they pay in September, other than you'd like to get it over with?
Because you made it a reimbursement program. If they haven't paid for it in full, we can't reimburse them.
Yeah,
We don't care. It's just, I just want you to know that we won't be finished with this program until October, November.
So you of the 2.some million, you've got 1,100,000 left.
Yes. So that total of 1.5, because we can't share any more information of that, we don't know how much was in tier 1 versus tier 2. So yes, we will certainly have money left over. Basically, yeah, about 1 million potentially left over. Yes, that is true.
Because I kind of thought, all along that we'd like to stretch this into a two-year project, because knowing that this year it was questionable, but knowing the way milk pricing goes, next year might be back to $16. Have you noticed how much the price of milk has gone up in the store since the price of milk went to $24, $25? Maybe 10 cents a gallon. I mean, no difference at all. So it doesn't seem to matter. The little box of cheese is the same price. So it doesn't seem to make a big difference if farmers get paid a fair price or if they get ripped off, I call it, with a low price. So our pricing system is really messed up. But anyways, any other questions for Diane?
No.
Well, thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Diane.
Diane.
Do
Thank
a
you very
good
much.
job over there.
Thanks
Have a
for
nice
supporting
day.
the governor's budget.
Yeah.
I do
thanks
support the
for
governor's
that.
budget as proposed. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Right.
Only the House and Senate did. Gotta go home.
Well, listen, if there's any way, so you're gonna try to put 250 in for this, the organic folk, the bulk tank stuff,
200.
200.
Yeah, it is in.
It isn't, you've done it. All right, well, if you,
Knock on wood.
no, listen. Have you ever watched the probes?
Watch the
It
probes.
is something to see because he sits at the end. It's just a little finger and you can see it, and you can hear it in Jane's voice. Senator Starr,
How much do
basically
you
she says,
want?
what will we be spending now? Well, if your finger had one more, little bit of energy to pull like 100 grand for that, what do we call it? The store and pack? I never-
Wash.
Washing station,
Washing station thing.
Are we, why aren't we, are we at any more other business?
No.
So, thank you, everybody, and we'll adjourn our meeting. We gotta be on the floor in a few minutes.